Hi friends, and welcome to another episode for the series of The House of Sky and Breath. This is the second book of the Crescent City trilogy that is out so far, and today we're talking about chapters 17 through 32. If you've been listening along, then you will know that things really started to pick up for me in the last recording, and really starting to like the fact that there's some action that's happening in this book and that it hasn't been taking so long to get there. One thing that I want to talk about before we dive in, because I recently just saw something on social media about this, is there seems to be a bit of a dialogue for fans of Sarah J. Maas and this series about how much world building there is. And so far, especially in book one, I've talked about how it just felt like I could read through really quickly, but it just felt like not a lot had happened. I may have mentioned this before, but I do want to acknowledge that I didn't look into a lot about the Crescent City series. I just knew that it was quite different from other series that Sarah J. Maas had written, and I just kind of left it at that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I do want to always speak to things as I see or hear them. And in this case, I still haven't sought out anything about the series. One, because I don't want there to be spoilers. I know that it's been out for a little while now, and I know that especially with social media algorithms, once you start to kind of look for that kind of thing, it'll just start to be served to you. And so I've really tried to stay away from anything to do with Crescent City so I can be completely unbiased and continue to just take the series for what it is. And that's really what had happened for me with ACOTAR as well as Throne of Glass. So I haven't sought out anything about it, but with what I recently saw on social media, it was in reference to an account whose name I don't recall that does a podcast that kind of dives into this whole world building. And I am very intrigued about that, and I probably will go and listen to those kinds of podcasts and that type of content after I'm done with all three of these books to better understand things that I likely had missed. And again, I think that comes from this place of really just as a first-time reader of Crescent City, and even though I feel like I did know better because I know the way that Sarah J. Maas writes and works, I took it at face value of just like there wasn't a lot that was happening and I wasn't as invested in the world building, and really kind of just chalked it up to more of like character building and setting the stage. And I'm not saying that there's anything necessarily wrong with that or that I'm wrong in feeling that that is what she had put her time to, but I do want to recognize that it has become apparent to me that there is likely details and things that I may have missed because I wasn't really grasping onto the why behind the world building. So again, it's not that I'm taking away from anything that I have felt or said in regard to this series so far and what I thought of the first book. What I think is really great about this, though, is that at some point in the future, I do want to do recordings for ACOTAR and Throne of Glass, which will come from me doing a reread. I feel like it is only fair that I record as I'm reading and not in any kind of synopsis. There's too much that goes on with her stories and the way that she writes to do justice to the series, which is why I wanted to do read-along series in the first place, because especially as I'm reading books that I'm very interested in or that I have a lot of stuff that happens within their pages, you do need to record a little bit more often to really get all of your thoughts and feelings shared. And it is going to be a very long read along whenever I decide to go back to those. But I'm saying that because I feel like me reading this series and finishing these three books, obviously more may come, but like getting through the three that are there now will allow me to, be caught up and kind of wrap up SJM until her new books come, and be in a place where I can do a reread of the series, but also have listened to content like this podcast that I'm referring to better understand all of the world building and some of the Easter eggs that I have likely missed. And what I think is interesting about that is I will watch that content sometimes. Like I'll see it for ACOTAR or Throne of Glass and I'll watch it because I've already read the series. But I don't, how do I want to say this? I don't know that I'm fully always digesting even those videos. It's interesting at the time, but it isn't always rewriting for me what it is that I've already read. But I think that being purposeful about watching that kind of content and understanding not necessarily just theories people have, not what people are hypothesizing, but what people's understanding is of the history and the world building that has occurred. Reading that, watching those kinds of videos about that kind of content and having that perspective before I go back into the books, I think could possibly make for it will certainly make for a different experience reading the books again, but it may make for a richer experience. So I want to acknowledge that in general, but what's fun about this for me is that I can do this where I'm getting all of my thoughts out and yet be open-minded to the fact that there's perspective that could change because of some of what other amazing readers have deduced or taken away from the books, and thus it may allow me to take more away from the books and see new details when I go back in. In short, I recognize that all of this is, especially with Crescent City, is my first reaction, and anything that I've said about ACOTAR or Throne of Glass is coming off of me having read them once. But I do think that there's a lot of the world building and the story that has been crafted that I could have missed, and things that I'm underplaying or not fully connecting, that I do think taking in some other content before I go and reread those series, it could be really important. That being said, today we are talking about chapters 17 through 32. So I've read a pretty healthy portion of the book, but it felt appropriate to stop at this point because holy heck, a lot of stuff has gone down. And I already feel like a broken record saying that from my last recording, but there is no absence of stuff really hitting in this book. So let's go ahead and dive in. I think the first place that I want to start at is the romance with Bryce and Hunt. I don't have a ton to say about this, but I do want to comment on it. As a romantasy fan and one who loves to see yearning and affection and likes that kind of lustful writing in my books, it is enjoyable to see them having more physical interactions and to see that in these stories. It hasn't come to its full peak yet, but SJM did that in ACOTAR where, she kind of plays it out with this tension and this build and then really gets to some pretty intense sex scenes. And so I know that that's what's going to come from this. I looked it up the other day and I know that it really hits in chapters like 54 and 55 because I was like, really, what are we talking about here? Like, when does this happen? It was the first time that I got curious of like how long we were, talking to get through. So I still have plenty of book to read before I get there, but it's nice to see as a fan from a romantasy side and somebody who likes that kind of smut writing and all of that kind of stuff. But what I also want to say about it, especially coming off of these chapters, is this actually layers into a broader thing about Hunt and Bryce together. Bryce mentions something about the sword and the knife meeting again. It's like a prophetic thing that she had mentioned. She either remembered it in one of these chapters when she had been talking or coming off of a conversation with Rune, or she had said it to him. I can't exactly remember. But when it was reiterated from her perspective, she was saying it from this place of like the Star Sword. They continue to have this conversation about the Star Sword being hers. She should be the one to wield it. And she's like, it isn't mine. Sure, its power comes to life when I have it, but it's you, Rune. You're the one who won it. It is rightfully yours. Like, I don't want it. And in this dialogue that is happening during that time, she is saying like, because of this like prophecy and this prophetic thing about the knife and the sword, she wondered if there was a knife that was out there for her. When that was said, honestly, the first thing that came to my mind before, as I was reading it, before I even got, to a few words or sentences later where she says, I wonder if the knife is out there for me, I thought about Hunt in the sense of it being her and Hunt as the representation of sword and knife. Because what we have seen that I talk about at the beginning of this book is that they both have had demons come to them. Well, I talked about this at the beginning of the book in relation to Bryce and the demon prince coming to her to say like, your power is greater than you know, and you need to know how to hone it. What happens in these chapters that I read is Hunt being quote unquote asleep, but this other demon prince or king, I forget what his name is, comes to him and says the same thing. And it's like they want them to be at their best, most powerful selves to make the wrath that they want to bring to this world worthwhile for whatever reason. And so that Hunt is going to be a beast. And I knew that at the end of the first book just because of the way that people already revered him. But once he had killed Sandriel and the way that people bowed down to him and just some of what was kind of laid, I knew that there was going to be more to him. Even though he's called Hunt, when people call him by his first name, Orion, it's always these really old beings, these demons and angels and stuff, that it's they know something about his lineage and about either his heritage and his past or his fate, that they revere him as Orion. And there is power in that and meaning in that, even though he doesn't like to be called Orion. And so when Bryce was having this thought about the sword and the knife, the only thing that I could think of is it made sense for it to be Hunt. They are meant to be together. They are meant to unite. And when they do, all hell is going to break loose in the best way for them, of course, in terms of power and being able to defend themselves. Coming off of where I am in this book right now, so I'm not debriefing these chapters in chronological order, but coming off of where I am right now, after everything that happened in the Bone Quarter, we see that start to come to life. We now know that Hunt can siphon powers because he siphoned it from the Dead Gate. We know that he can direct his power towards Bryce and it not hurt her, but she consume it and wield it. So he is giving her power to wield more of her power. And that just makes them even more unstoppable. And this is only the beginning, in my opinion, of them really understanding what their power can do. Obviously, I've stopped at a pivotal point where I feel like they're going to very quickly figure out more about their power, especially when they regroup with everybody and they talk about what happened and really dissect what has gone on. I don't think that this is going to be the peak of their power. I think it is just going to be one branch of it, and already it makes them very unstoppable, especially together. My gut feeling of that kind of prophetic sword and knife is speaking towards them, and it's not a literal sword and knife, because at the end of the day, even if the Star Sword is not Bryce's in the way of her having been the one to claim it and to own it and to wield it, technically she is the one that makes the most sense to have it, and she does have a sword from Danica anyway. So she has always been the representation of the sword. And so Hunt has been the representation of the knife. It makes perfect sense. So I do feel excited that I made that connection, and that my inclination from what I had read was immediately to think of both of them together. And then all of these chapters later, we see that start to be the case and see them in action together. As with anything, this could also mean a lot of hardship or tragedy. It doesn't necessarily just mean that they're going to be the most powerful and survive all things together. But my hope is that it allows them to really have a fighting chance at this war that's coming and to get through it on the other side because of the power that they not only wield individually, but will inevitably wield together. Moving on from that, I want to talk about Tharian, because he's going to kind of lead us into this overall discussion about the ruling parties in this story. I am still really liking the fact that we are getting a lot from Tharian's perspective. That hasn't changed from the last time that I recorded. He is a central character in this book, and we are seeing him and his thought process of the life that he lives. What I find interesting is him talking about how he wants things to change. He doesn't want the way in which his life is going and the way in which his queen rules to be the end-all be-all. He wants there to be change. And while he is playing the role that he has to play by being betrothed to the queen's daughter and, showing this respect towards her and showing the respect towards his queen and dealing with the punishments that she doles out, he's doing all of this out of a place of survival. And I think that for a long while, it wasn't that it wasn't out of a place of survival, but it was always out of a place of duty. Because if anything, what you have to remember, and what is always kind of at not odds, but like there's this tug and pull of it in this book, is that the traditions and the laws and what is expected of every single house, whether it be the queen who rules this part, this river in this book, or whether it be the Asteri, or whether it be the Ophion, the lore runs deep. The expectations run deep, and people who've been around for centuries and millennia, because they are eternal, they hold that at the highest of regard. But what we are starting to see is that these individuals who are at the younger end, I should say, of these ruling bodies are starting to realize how dangerous it is and how not actually beneficial it is to everybody who is under the rule of these different people, and how there's some value in what it is that they're upholding, but there is also a good amount that isn't like just and isn't right. And so Tharion is questioning that in his own court, right? Like he's like, I know that my queen would do anything and everything for her people, but also she doles out punishments towards them, and she is willing to like bring hell down on them for any wrongdoing, or to make sure that she like proves a point or whatever it is, right? And so there is this sense of like all of these rulers to a degree are leading with fear. They care about their people and they want what is best for their people, and there's a lot of respect that their people have for them in that. But they also just take absolutely no shit, and they want to be revered. They aren't looking for opinion from their people. It is not a democracy. And so he is starting to be in this place of like, I just can't live my life like this forever, and something has to change. When we're going through this book and you're getting his perspective, it was nice to see him own that. And you're starting to understand that he is going to become an ally of this cause with Bryce and Hunt and the other characters. And it's not that I doubted that he was an ally, but there was a moment where I was always wondering. And I mentioned this earlier about like, I'm curious about Tharion and like where he pans out, because there was such dialogue where he was like, I'm committed to this court and to this queen. Like, I wondered, how far would his loyalties go? How far would he be willing to push things? Is he going to be somebody that will take it to a certain extent, but then do everything he can for his court, even if it means betraying the others? But I'm starting to get this sense that that isn't going to be the case. And I think because the other characters feel that way about their respecting ruling bodies as well, that is what makes them this court that I spoke about before. You have another female character, in this case Bryce, who is at the center of it, and these powerful allies around her who are going to go to battle for her and with her for the sake of what it is that she's going to inevitably try to do, which is to just do right by the people. And they're all going to be willing to sacrifice whatever they have to do that. Every time that something happens in a story that puts a building block for that cause forward, and that is reinforcing the foundation of that to be true, is just really cool to see. And it makes me excited for what the battles are going to actually be when it comes. And obviously there's a little bit of nervousness there because of any potential lives lost. But what made especially the events of Throne of Glass, but of ACOTAR, so much of what it is when you would get into the battles and seeing the characters willing to die for each other and for their love of each other, but also their mission at hand. It makes for really powerful reading and a very emotional reading. And so you know that this book isn't, like the series isn't going to be lacking that. And so there is a little bit of anticipation for me as a reader of how epic it is going to turn out to be. But also, a little bit of anxiety for how that's going to go as well. So Tharion kind of starts to have these thoughts, and you see that as you get his inner monologue when you're reading chapters from his perspective. Where you also see that, which is what I had mentioned in my past recording, but I want to touch on more now, is Cormac. We obviously get to know Cormac more now because in the last episode, we had just found out that he is an Ophion rebel, and he's not just being blind to his Fae leadership and to, the place in this whole world where he comes from. He wants things to change, but even though he is working with Ophion and the rebels, he even says about the Ophion that, he's not blindly allegiant, because the characters have questioned him. you want to get Emil and you want to, help save this boy and his sister, and the Ophion want that, but you don't necessarily want the Ophion to have them. So what is about that? And it's like, he'll just kind of comment on like, yeah, I want them to be safe. And while I agree with a lot of the Ophion, I don't agree with everything. What is uniting all of these different characters is the fact that they know that Emil and his sister, Sophie, are going to be so powerful and they're clearly so wanted that whoever wants them is only going to want them to wield them as weapons. And that is where they draw the line. That is where all of these characters, whether it is Carmack for the Ophion or even for his own Fae lineage, whether it is Therian for the Queen, whether it is Hunt and Bryce for the Astari, they, or even, Bryce's dad and the archangels that lead Hunt, they don't want any of these bodies to have these people. And that's how you know that they're all going to come together, because that is a united cause that they all share. But also, what are these people going to do? I mean, sure, they could save them and then try to like free them out of Crescent City and hope that they can just continue to be on the run. But what I think is inevitable to happen is that these characters are going to join them. And they're going to be a part of this court that is being created. And how they're going to end up living without being bothered and being these crazy, powerful creatures amongst people like Bryce and Hunt, who are going to also become even more powerful than they already are, I don't know. But when I say that just now, you realize that the four of them together probably and likely are going to be able to fend off some serious ass shit. So there is a real world where they could just live in Crescent City and they could just go through this war, and if they make it out on the other side, live their lives in this world and just fend off whatever comes their way, because stuff is going to come their way no matter where they are. But if they're all together, they really will always have a fighting chance. I hope that that's the case, but there is a part of me that does worry that both Sophie and Emil might not make it through this. I am indifferent about how I feel about Cormac. I think he is an ally, and I don't necessarily see him as being somebody to double cross them. So part of me wants him to have his love restored to him with Sophie and to live out their life together and to like realize their mission of taking down the Asteri and not living under this rule that is just so not really for the people and not with the people's best interests in mind. I want them to have that and to be able to come out the other side. But I would be shocked if Cormac, Sophie, and Emil make it through this entire thing. For some reason, there's something about that group that I just feel there's too much weighing down on them and too many people after them for that to go perfectly. Now, all of that said, the other thing that continues to be really interesting to me is Baxian and Pollux. So they come from having been under Sandriel's rule and are some of the worst that Hunt had ever saw and dealt with. But he has been away from them for a really long time. And so what we continue to see as these characters come throughout the book is that they are at odds with each other. And Hunt questions that. Like, he's like, you guys, worked alongside Sandriel kind of blindly. And Baxian continues to say, you don't know me. You can sit there all you want and think that I was just blind. Like, I may not have been legally enslaved like you were, but if you don't think that I wasn't forced to do things, and if you think I was just doing it out of blind loyalty, you're so wrong in that thought. And so there's a lot to Baxian that I think we're going to uncover. He is certainly another character that I think they're trying to position as being this ally, but I doubt him even more than I doubted Cormac. And so I don't know how it's going to come together. If I had to guess, I think Baxian may be somebody who Hunt becomes cool with, but not in the way that all of our main characters, like all of the central characters of the story are. I don't think he's going to be coming to hang out at Bryce's like all of the rest of them. I think he's just going to be somebody that Hunt ends up having an understanding with, and it's going to be that. Pollux is still the worst of the worst. So part of me really hopes that he doesn't actually become that, and that Hunt doesn't find any kind of respect or kinship for him. I wouldn't mind if Pollux gets killed in this war. And so if lives are going to be lost, either of them at this point, I would be okay with. But I think that Pollux needs to go through a special kind of hell. And I kind of hope that they allow that to actually take place and that we as readers get to see that, because he just seems like the worst of the worst. But it is interesting how SJM is trying to weave Baxian into Hunt's life. You know that that isn't going to be for nothing. So either he's going to, they're going to come to an understanding, or shit's going to hit the fan with that in some kind of way. That being said, as we've been reading a lot of these chapters, obviously Pollux and Therion were in them, and that's how you come to this understanding of like Baxian being somebody that we don't know a lot about, and that we're led to misunderstand intentionally, and that there's more than meets the eye. But he then, like, they're out of sight, out of mind for a while. And Hunt, runs back into Baxian when him and Bryce are going to the Bone Quarter. And it kind of reminds you that, like, he is creeping around and he is snooping and he is curious. And that's what continues to weave this whole thing of, like, we can't trust him and we don't know where his allegiance really lies. That leads me then to talk about the Archangel. We see an instance in this book where I think it was when Rune went to go talk to his dad, where his dad basically calls her soft and says, like, you think that the, Asteri really put her in place to be somebody that is going to, like, defy them or change things. Like, she's just kind of, I think what he was alluding to is that she is moldable, and she's just going to be at their beck and call regardless of how she presents. And we see that a little bit because we now know that she's going to be going through a mating ritual, and she doesn't say anything negative about it. She accepts it, and the person that she's going to be mating with is somebody that she knows and that she seems to revere. And so you seem that, like, it's okay, but still Hunt's perception of this is like, oh, the Asteri is flexing their muscles by making sure that she knows that they can have control over her body and her ability to, like, be a mother, and they're going to force her to do that. And so they're flexing their muscles of control with her very body and her will, basically. And that obviously is really fucked up. Even still, I think that there is a possibility that this Archangel is going to be somebody who will be on their side if it comes down to taking down the Asteri. Her showing remorse for Hunt and not being able to free him, we are supposed to be on guard by that, right? Just like Hunt is, and him saying, like, this could all be a ploy. She could be just trying to gain my trust, but I'm not going to just fall so easily for believing that she knew my past love and that they were great friends and that they hid this friendship and that she was going to do anything to try to free me. I think, though, that that is real, and I think that seeing Hunt's skepticism is just appropriate to his character and to the story. But I would hope that there comes something in this story that either proves that right, that verifies that she had tried and tried and tried, and really solidifies her as an ally, or when it comes down to it and they start to go to fight, she's going to, be there and going to show up. And the person who she's going to end up having this mating ritual with will be there as well. Like, I think we are sowing this web of individuals who are going to finally feel like they can stand against all of these separate entities and demand change. Whether they fully take them down or not is another thing. Like, I would be surprised if at the end of this book, or even all three of them, if the Asteri ceases to exist altogether. I don't think we're going to go that far. And I don't think that, like, Therion's queen is going to go away. And I don't think, I think if anything, the Ophion will go away because they're rebels, and that can kind of, I feel like, be overrun more than these larger ruling bodies, because the Therion's queen is only one of several of the other queens that are owning their respective rivers. So, like, there is broader leadership that's happening, just like the world in which, Cormac comes from and his ruling body. There's a lot more that are out there. And granted, they all kind of ladder up to the Asteri from the way that I understand it. But still, I don't know if it will just be a massive shift when it's all said and done, or if really the massive shift comes as a result of the Asteri being taken down and them creating new rule with all of these entities that already exist and setting new expectations to make things better. Obviously, we will come to find out. It is interesting to see somebody like this current Archangel lead and have to rein in people like Pollux, and already I think that she's done a good job with that and kind of showing that she's not just going to let them run free and take their shit on both sides. She's not going to let Pollux just go and abuse women and let him get away with that, but she's also not going to let Baxian make a fool of her by trying to rein in Pollux, which is both complicated, but ultimately we see that neither of them really get the punishment that they deserve because the Asteri is saying that they can't. So they are tied into the Asteri in ways that I don't fully understand, but that just goes to show the evilness that really is within the Asteri and how they rule. Again, they're ruling with fear. It is not coming from a place of like what's best for our people. It's just coming from a place of keeping the order that they presume exists and that they want to keep in this land. This kind of leads me to my final point that I want to talk about, which is all that we have come to know now about the situation that is affecting all of these characters. It is very evident that Danica was involved in a lot of things that Bryce didn't know about, and she continues to grapple with this idea of not really knowing Danica at all. And people just continue to tell her how much Danica loved her and that that is what she should focus on. But she really just continues to say, like, I just don't know her as well as I thought that I did. If I had to guess, I think that in the end, everything that Bryce is going to come to know about Danica, she is going to find a way to be at peace with to some degree, and nothing is really going to come of it. But it is interesting how much they keep bringing it up, because the alternative of nothing coming of it is her ending up like hating Danica and just being like, she was not the person that I thought that she was, and I'm forever mad at her. Like, I don't think there's ever a world where that is going to be the case. So in my opinion, I think it's going to eventually get squashed, but how much are we going to find out to get us there? And what I mean by that is, even in this few chapters that I read, when we finally see that the Hind shows up in the city with her goons, the Harpy is one of them, and then her second, who is like her most lethal enforcer, I'm forgetting his name, but in that moment, Ethan ends up saying that this is Danica's dad. And what you come to find out in the dialogue between Rune and Ethan is that he had showed up once to talk to Danica, so the pack knew about it. She basically like never said exactly what went down between them, but that she wants nothing to do with him and has no ties to him at all. So he is presented in this book as being just that, a very lethal enforcer who is there to, like, he was there to hunt down Ethan and Rune. That was the impression that we got. The one thing that I will say about this is I was shocked to find out that that was her dad, and I'm very curious to see what Bryce's reaction is going to be when she figures it out as well, because that's going to inevitably happen in swift order. But there was a moment when that happened when a little bit of something bloomed in my chest, and I couldn't tell you why, because here's the thing. Sabine is terrible, right? Like, there was a moment earlier on when I think it was Bryce in her inner monologue that was like, who would have ever like hooked up with Sabine enough to like get her pregnant and have a kid with her? There's a moment where you start to feel a little bit of tiny, I think I mentioned this in one of the episodes of the first book, but I at least felt a tiny grain of sand's worth of empathy for Sabine and a little kernel of hope that she wasn't going to be as wicked as she came across to be. And that doesn't really hold up since I felt that way. When you introduce a character like Danica's dad and how lethal and evil that he is, the characters who know about that, what they've hypothesized is that maybe this is what drove Danica to the Ophion. Maybe that drove her to that place because she wants to completely take down everything that is inherently tied to that man, which would again be the Asteri. However, my initial reaction wasn't just the shock of like being sad for Danica that was her dad. I have a positivity in it because I think that he's going to end up being a rebel. I think it's going to be a situation where he's kind of like Baxian, where I've had to do terrible and awful things, and I've had to stand by women who are ruling with viciousness and without remorse and with absolute death and destruction at their reign, and just again, no remorse. But also I've been doing it for the sake of this other thing. And I could imagine that he came to Danica to talk to her about that, and her initial reaction was really negative and not wanting to be a rebel and being disgusted about it until she went looking for it. And I think she changed her mind. I think that he is going to end up being a part of it, and I could see him being a character that doesn't make it through this war, because when the Hind finds out that he is not really on her side and that he is a traitor, I think that he's going to probably square up with her, and I don't know that he's going to make it out. But I think that his death will spur somebody else, maybe even Ethan himself, to end up killing the Hind. And that's kind of how SJM works. It's like you have these moments where you see characters who you feel some kind of way about and who you feel doesn't need redemption, but you end up kind of liking or having an affinity towards, and they end up ultimately sacrificing themselves, but somebody else gets the person who took their lives. And I could see that playing out for him. I would be pretty shocked if he just stayed this cruel and vicious leader, because we kind of already have that. Sabine, in her own right, is just cruel and vicious, but not so much like the Hind or like Sandriel. And then you have people like Bryce's dad, who's the same. He seems kind of cruel and vicious, but he doesn't seem to be of the same league as the Hind or as Sandriel. I don't know that for a fact, but I just don't get that vibe. Sure, it's possible that that is the case for Danica, and that her parents, you have one like Sabine who's the worst and one like her dad who's even more terrible, and it could just be that he is, and that he just needs to, die a slow and painful death whenever this war inevitably happens. But I could very well see him as being somebody on the inside and being able to be the one to take down someone like the Hind, which would be a very huge deal in bringing the Asteri down, in my opinion, and from what I understand of it all as of now. So I obviously am very interested to see how that all plays out and what ends up really coming to life with all of these characters being in the city and looking for Emil and Sophie. I say all of this because we obviously know that there's a lot that we didn't know about Danica, and I think that that is going to come out even in kind of reaching back to her father like I've laid out, but I think it's going to wrap up in a place that Bryce is going to be able to understand and accept. What we also see, though, in terms of secrets and or lies, if you kind of want to put them in the same category, is the characters are starting to get this realization of exactly how screwed up the Asteri is. And it's not that they didn't know, but I think it's just compounding to lead them to this place of knowing that ultimately taking them down is the only option. And so even though I just said a few minutes ago, like, I can't see a world in which the Asteri is just not there, like what could possibly take them all down to where they completely cease to exist as a ruling body. That could be, that it could be a war of that epic of nature that has to happen and completely crumble everything down to its foundation again because of how deep their actual evil goes, that the characters have been led to believe isn't, quote unquote, as bad. But what we have been seeing is just how they have played this game, right? And so the example of that is a little bit with the conversation that they've had with some of these demons, talking about, like, you think that the Asteri have been there to help, you think that this was, for you, but they're not necessarily really looking out for you. They're just trying to protect certain things for themselves, and whoever dies in that process, they don't care about. That is the opposite of what it is that people like Bryce and Hunt want. They want the people to be first, and the Asteri don't give a shit as long as their ultimate goal is protected. We've already seen that kind of come to life. We've also seen the talks of the history, right? Where they say that, like, the history that Bryce's old boss has in her secret library is the truth. And what the Asteri have led you to believe is the version that they want you to know. And it is there intentionally, and it is designed purposefully, and it's all a lie. We already saw that come out, right? And they're understanding just how far this kind of like corruption and this lie goes. Where we then see that again is when Bryce and Hunt are in the Bone Quarter, and the ruler of the Bone Quarter is basically telling them, like, the lies that you've been fed to believe is that this is like an eternal place of rest, and that whatever version that you like think up is what it will be for you. But the reality at the end of the day is that, like, when souls are ready to fully go, they go through the dead gate and they're transferred back into energy, basically, that feeds back to like serve the kingdom. That's it. It's just a source of nutrients. It is a source of survival. It is the same type of thing as with the gates that are in the city, but in a different kind of way. We all are here to just serve the greater power and just go right back into where it is that we came from, right? You're born into this world, you live your life, you ultimately die, and you give your power right back, and it, serves a greater good. And there is no resting place. Your soul goes right back to the man, basically. And I'm very curious to see how, when Bryce and Hunt share that with the others, how they all take that. I'm sure they're all going to be on the same page, and they're going to be disgusted by it. And it's just going to be one more notch in this whole take this Asteri down mission, because it's disgusting, right? It's like you see in the moment of them being at the bone quarter, you see Hunt have this realization that because Bryce made this sacrifice for Danica to be in her place, that he's not going to be able to rest with her forever, and that their deaths may come sooner than either of them would want because of this war that's coming. And he's like torn up for a minute about the fact that him and Bryce won't be in the same place forever. But by the end of it, and when he comes away with it, he's like, I will never rest in the bone quarter if I can help it, because all that ends up happening is your soul goes back to the man. So it doesn't matter that Bryce can't rest there. Her and Hunt aren't going to be in this eternal resting place together anyway, because it's all bullshit. So I think that they are having the curtain ripped away before their eyes of just how much is fake and how much is manufactured for the benefit of this ruling body that really wants nothing good for them, and it's all just to feed the machine and their power, and again, ruling from a place of fear, that people will just fear them enough to always give in and to always bow down and to never betray them and never curse them. But this is going to be the book where these powerful characters are going to start to stand up to these people. And I really don't think that it's all going to come to a head here. I think they're going to have this battle with the demons and all this stuff. And I think whatever fractures is going to come from that is going to be set to where really the big stuff kind of happens in book 3. But also, from what I understand, this series isn't just going to be 3 books. So there is going to be something more that is going to eventually come out of all of this. But I think that taking down this body, this ruling body that is the Asteri, is going to happen within these 3 books. I don't think that that's the kind of cliffhanger we're going to be left on. And I think if it was, it would have made its way, across my plate somehow by this point, just in social media and all of that. This reading so far is interesting because there's a processing that has to happen with every character's reaction, even if they're all on the same page and united in the sense of like, screw the Asteri and screw all these ruling bodies. And, we know that stuff has to change. How each person, each character kind of processes that and what it means for them and their identity and what it means for their relationship with the ruling body, it's all processed a little bit differently, and there's enough characters to make that interesting enough to read about and to see how that all unfolds and comes to light. Has been an interesting journey so far, and that's why when such good dramatic nuggets are happening in this book, I'm so enjoying it, because I know that the process of all of them finding out this stuff and figuring out what it means to them is going to be interesting to see, and I've been enjoying seeing it. The last thing that I want to touch on with all of this is the situation with Rune helping out Carmack and the Ophion and his connection to this other agent that is working undercover. I had a feeling that when Rune decided to do this, even if it was for a short time, there was going to be something interesting with this agent that he met with. And we come to find out that it's a female. And within the first interaction, though, I think it was the first, it might have been the second one, when she was telling him to wake up with the Reapers attacking him. But he says, I recognize her voice. He knows her. In one of the most recent interactions we see, he's trying to kind of peel her apart, and he'll say stuff like her responses are more ancient. She's older being in the way that she's responding and what she's saying and how her dialogue is. And he's piecing it together in his inner monologue, and he's kind of challenging her though and saying some of that stuff oh, you're much older, aren't you? And she's like, don't you worry about me. There was a moment when all this first started that I was like, it's Fury. Fury's going to be the one who is this agent. In one of the more recent ones, she says that you need to not be asking questions, right? She also is critical of him to be you're too young to be doing this. I don't know why they trust you. You're reckless. You don't you need to not question me and question the whole purpose of why we're here. You're not going to like the wrath that you get on the other side. And he, kind of is what wrath? And she's like, it should be evident by how you are interacting with me. And I think what she means by that is her power is fire, because she represents as flame. And I think that that is a representation of who they are. Whatever cover that ends up happening and cloaking them when they're in this interaction together in their minds, or whatever bridge it is through magic, it is their own power enveloping them. And so his is the night sky. His is stars and skies. It's because his power comes from the stars. Her power then comes from flame. And so when this all first went down, I thought that it was Fury. I thought that she was going to be the one on the other side of it. But then knowing that it's flames and knowing that she is older, I'm like, Fury kind of presents as more knowledgeable because she is lethal and secretive. And so it could be her. But we also don't get any mention of what Fury's power is, at least that I can remember. And we never see it really be fire. And I think that Bryce's dad is fire. So there's a question there of like, is it from their lineage? Is this somebody from their lineage that is ruling to this day, or that kind of comes from that same power that we haven't met yet? Obviously, that's entirely possible. It could be completely unrelated, but I was like, that would be interesting. There was a moment where I thought maybe it's the Witch Queen, and maybe they're putting in this other layer of like mysteriousness towards her, but towards Rune, so that they kind of build this bond in another way. But then I was like, she's already been established as a witch. We know that she is. There's no way that she is going to be Fae in any kind of way and have any kind of power like this. So it isn't her. The fire is just the interesting piece, and I'm not really sure how to place that or where that's come from. There was a small moment as we wrapped up the chapter that I'm in, which was also, again, I always stop at like the most pivotal points, but I also think there's only so much that I can take in a session of reading. I stop at the point where the Hind and the Harpy find Rune and find Ethan, and she steps into the bar, and Rune is just commenting on how she's the most beautiful woman that he's ever seen. And then Bryce is like, we gotta go freaking find them because they're not answering their phone. So she knows that something's up. So they're all gonna kind of have a meeting of some kind. There was a moment for some reason in that interaction when she walks into the bar and sees Rune that I thought it was gonna be her, that she was going to be the other agent. So going back to my theory about Danica's dad, he could be as evil and terrible as he is. And instead of him being the double agent to the Hind could be the one that's the double agent, which again would be nuts because she's a completely psychotic person and completely unrelenting and has done so much damage and killed so many people that it would be kind of crazy. But also because of that, she would be the last person that anybody would suspect. And I could see her being bold enough to interact with Rune in person. It's possible, but I think that that's probably the least likely. I think it's more likely for Danica's dad to be a double agent than the Hind. The other thing I'll say is, I was just going to say, and now I'm just hypothesizing, so I'll end my rant in a second, but it's kind of fun to think about it. It could be Sophie. But again, the power that's manifesting is fire. It's not, if she's a Thunderbird, it would be lightning. So I would think that it would manifest, like if this was Bryce going in, I think she would also be like night and stars like Rune is. I think that Hunt would probably be more like shadow and even thunder, like a storm. And that any Thunderbird or anyone wielding that kind of power would manifest in that way and not as fire, because yes, lightning can start fire, but his power is not inherently fire. I don't know who the person is on the other end of this and who this agent is, but if I had to guess, I think that this agent that Rune is talking to is going to matter. I think that they're going to be on his side and Bryce and Hunt's side. I just am very curious of who it is. It could be the Archangel. That could be the way in which she proves that like she wasn't bullshitting to Hunt and she was trying to help him the whole time. I don't know. That is one that I am very interested to find out. But as always, the things that unfold when you read this story, there's never any shortage of surprise. I always am delighted by the way in which it's delivered, even if it's news that I'm like, shit, like this isn't good for our whole cast of characters. So I'm just really liking the way that this is progressing and the amount of action that I'm getting and how we're learning about stuff, learning about the histories and the lies and the deception through this kind of active adventure and like these mini battles and stuff. Obviously it's stressful, but I really like that more than just kind of bland world building. And so I'm trying to do more to really process and digest it. But even still, as with everything with SJM, I'm sure there's plenty of Easter eggs that I've missed, but really, really liking this so far. So much so that, I again, as I always say, I'm giving myself the liberty to just kind of stop when I want to stop and read when I want to read. So I stopped a little bit earlier than I had hoped to. I stopped at chapter 33, so I read through chapter 32. Chapter 33 starts on page 358, so I'm only a little bit shy of the 200 page mark, it being at 200 pages since kind of my last recording, roughly speaking. So if I'm trying to keep to 3 or 4 episodes for this book, it wasn't that short of a stop for me to record, but I don't know. I mean, I have about half of this book to go, and it may end up resulting in a lot more recordings than I thought. And again, I'm okay with that. I just want to lean into record when I want to record and share my thoughts when I want to, especially when the content is so good. And I'm really stoked that this has turned around, and it makes me really excited to read the rest of this book and for what's ahead in this third book too. As always, I appreciate you all listening to these episodes. I hope that you're enjoying this read along. I want to hear what you're thinking and feeling about it. So please make sure that in the YouTube comments, you're, telling me what of what I'm saying is resonating with you, what your thoughts are if they differ, what your hypothesis is, or if what I'm saying gives you a perspective you hadn't thought about. That's what I want out of this community and what I want to hear about. So really excited to continue reading along, and just so thankful that you're all here and listening. Thank you so much, and until next time, friends.